So my part of this discussion is about the macroeconomic and fiscal dimensions of what we do here at the Treasury. My colleague Margaret Galt, I believe, talked to you about the living standards framework, which is our way of trying to bring together a lot of the different things that we as citizens care about, and that we try to frame our advice to governments about in terms of policy choices that they have to make to confront some of these challenges that you've been talking about in the beginning of the day. Things like climate change, aging populations, the growth of social media, changing nature of democracy, and things like that. So just to recap, really, before I get to my three themes, which is really how I'd like to frame what we'll talk about in the small groups. Here is our living standards Pentagon. Again, you can see that the sort of 5 things that kind of resonate for people as objectives. We've got economic growth, sustainability for the future, increasing equity, managing risk, and improving social infrastructure. Now, of course, nobody could disagree that any of these are important things to pursue, but the real challenge is to understand where there may be trade-offs between them when we're making economic policy and social policy and other interventions in the economy and in its society to improve the well-being of New Zealanders. Going to the macroeconomic part of my remarks, I'm the director, by the way, of a directorate called Economic System, and one of the things that we do is produce forecasts of economic performance to support the government's fiscal policy decisions. Broadly speaking, what we're doing is trying to forecast the amount of tax revenue that the government can expect to collect over the next 4 or 5 years, and that basically gives you the budget that the government can work towards in determining spending decisions and so on. So economic growth is a really important part of that, clearly, because that is the income base for the country on which taxes are levied. So if your economy is not growing, if it's not producing that a decent level of income, you don't collect as much tax, therefore you cannot spend on the things that you would like to promote the objectives in the living standards framework. Now, if you look across other advanced economies, and usually we refer to the OECD group of advanced economies, there's about 35 of them, all more or less with a similar standard of living to New Zealand. Not necessarily all democracies, or different styles of democracies, if you like, but sort of comparable to New Zealand. If you compare us, our per capita income, so our per capita GDP, if you like, with those countries, you'll see that what's happened over the, just looking at this, just pointing at the chart now, our relative performance against that group of advanced countries actually declined quite a bit, from 110% of the OECD average in 1970 to about 80% of the OECD average. Now, it's not that the absolute standard of living was declining in New Zealand over that time. It's more that other countries were growing faster than we were. And so understanding that decline is a really important part of what we try and do. And then since the early 90s, we've sort of maintained that kind of 80% level of performance against the OECD average. And this is actually not what you would expect using very simple economic theory. You would expect that in an open economy where people travel and ideas bounce around the globe and you can invest in other countries and bring innovation and knowledge to other countries, you would expect that New Zealand at 80% would catch up to the frontier of best practice. Right? There's a strong incentive actually to learn from other countries that are doing well and catch up to them. So that sort of theory would tell you that the line should be doing that, should be approaching at least the 100% level. And of course, what we should be striving to do is exceed the 100% to get to the top. Everyone's trying to sort of get to that upper league sort of thing. So this is one of our big economic challenges that we face. There's all sorts of reasons, which I'm not going to sort of spend a lot of time getting into, about why that chart might look like the way it does. Two of the main factors that we think about a lot are size and distance. New Zealand is small, and it's also very far from its main economic markets. And while there are examples of other small countries around the world and other remote countries around the world, there's actually very few that are both small and remote. So Australia is probably one of the other ones that you certainly, if you ask Australians, they will tell you that they're also certainly remote. They might not say that they're as small as we are. But this is quite a unique combination of challenges for us. And so, to overcome those disadvantages, what a lot of economic policy has focused on is freeing up markets to be flexible and resilient and to be able to capture those innovations and new ways of doing things that generate improvements in income that we would all like. Okay. So that's, if you like, the source of revenue for governments. Very, very broadly speaking, that's the tax base. That's what you tax to collect revenue to go and spend on on improving the well-being of New Zealanders at large. There are challenges to that too. We've, on the spending side, on spending pressures, if you like, and I'm pretty sure during the course of the day you'll have spoken about the challenges, and Sir Michael just referred to the challenges of increasing demands on healthcare expenditure, increasing demands on old age pensions and so on due to the ageing population. You might also say that as climate change starts to take its effect on the business environment and our ability to, for example, the agricultural sector to continue to be as productive as it is, that's also going to be an area of spending demand for future governments, current and future governments, to have to manage. And this is a chart that illustrates that. Here we've got a projection of revenue, total Crown revenue in the yellow there on the chart. Broadly flat, matching, as a proportion of GDP, and some modelling that we in the Treasury have done on the expenditure demands, if you like, over that time period. And we're looking pretty far ahead, about 60 years here, 50, 60 years, and you can see that the modelling suggests, these blue bars, if you like, are the gap between what you might expect to be the demands on government expenditure and the ability to fund that expenditure. Broadly speaking, how are we going to meet this challenge of continuing to grow the economy and continuing to manage the government's finances to match spending pressures with the revenue that we're able to collect? My first idea goes to this idea of flexibility and resilience and diversity. Now, maybe the people in this room probably may not have been around for the amount of time needed to see the sort of broad changes in the structure of the economy in New Zealand over the past few decades, but it has, of course, changed quite a bit. We've seen the emergence of new industries, the tech industry, biotech, and so on are all new industries that have come about precisely because we've had the sorts of structures that allow those innovations to be captured and commercialised and developed into new forms of business. So the purpose of a lot of policy and economic regulation is to create the environment for those things to happen, to ensure that our industry is flexible, diverse, resilient, and internationally connected. The internationally connected part being about making sure that the flows of people and capital and ideas are able to continue into New Zealand to enable us to continue capturing and catching up to best practice internationally. I mentioned NGOs. I think this is quite important because one of the challenges over the next few decades is this issue around the future of work and automation. The structure, the sort of contractual and legal form of incorporated companies, if you like, is actually relatively young. That's not the only way to organise economic activity. There are lots of other ways to do it, and the NGO sector, that label captures quite a few of them. There's lots of organisations out there where people actually work for money, but they're not doing it for an explicit profit motive. They're doing it for other motives. But that still has an impact on the resilience and diversity and so on of the economy. So it's pretty important to recognise, I think. And it may be the case that with automation and the increasing, very small-scale business that we're seeing emerging with things like Uber and other forms of the gig economy, this might be more and more important as time goes on. The second one is a little bit more obvious, I suppose. The government does a lot of things as well as tax and spend. It also owns assets, as you know, state-owned enterprises and other essentially commercial activities of the government. And it makes lots of rules. It regulates the economy. And the challenge for us, or for governments and for us as advisors to governments, is to make sure that all of those activities maximise, if you like, and strike the best trade-offs among those dimensions of the living standards framework as possible. And finally, our third challenge, as I would see it, is to build a strong base of physical, social and environmental assets to underpin future prosperity. And that's my way of trying to capture everything and saying, a simplistic view of economics might be to say, well, you earn so you can spend. But actually lots of things that we do in economics are about investing in assets for the future. You save to invest. People out there engage in community activities because presumably they want to create an asset for the future that other people, future generations, can enjoy. Those are my three themes. I'll leave it there and pass on to my colleague, David.